For 3 decades, Johnny Carson stood as the undisputed monarch of late-night television, a master of timing and charm, who welcomed Hollywood's elite into millions of American homes each night. But beneath the polished veneer of The Tonight Show existed a fascinating unpredictability. Those rare moments when celebrities arrived at NBC's Burbank studios, having indulged far too heavily before the cameras rolled. In an era before social media could immortalize every misstep and publicists controlled every syllable, stars sometimes stumbled onto that famous stage creating television that was equal parts legendary and cringeworthy. What made these encounters truly remarkable wasn't merely watching famous faces under the influence, but witnessing how the unflappable Carson navigated each unpredictable situation. Working in an era of live television with no editing safety net, he had to think quickly when confronted with slurring legends and rambling icons who might say or do absolutely anything. While other hosts might have panicked, Carson typically deployed a masterful combination of gentle redirection, strategic commercial breaks, and knowing glances toward Ed McMahon that acknowledged the elephant in the room without humiliating his guests. Of course, not every interview could be salvaged, and some celebrities found themselves permanently removed from the guest list after particularly catastrophic appearances. When Truman Capote walked onto The Tonight Show set in 1980, viewers immediately sensed something amiss. The brilliant author of In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, celebrated for his razor-sharp wit, could barely navigate from curtain to chair without stumbling. What followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable 17 minutes in Tonight Show history. From Carson's opening greeting, it became painfully clear that Capote was severely intoxicated. His responses emerged as nearly incomprehensible mumbles, forcing Carson to lean forward, repeatedly asking for clarification. Throughout the segment, Capote slurred virtually every word, often to the point where even Carson appeared genuinely confused about what the author was attempting to communicate. When trying to discuss his latest work, Capote launched into rambling anecdotes that veered wildly between topics, eventually landing on a bizarre story about Montgomery Clift that seemed to have no discernible structure. The audience's initial excitement gradually transformed into palpable discomfort. The low point arrived when Capote attempted to sip water and nearly missed the glass entirely, sending liquid cascading down his chin onto his shirt. Rather than acknowledging the mishap, he continued speaking as if nothing had occurred, now sporting a large wet spot visible to millions. Carson tried valiantly to steer the conversation toward coherence, repeatedly attempting to focus Capote with specific questions about his writing process or literary influences. But these lifelines consistently failed, as the author drifted into increasingly bizarre non-sequiturs. As the interview mercifully approached its conclusion, Carson signaled for an early commercial break, exhaling with visible relief as the cameras cut away. Backstage afterward, Carson reportedly described the experience as a hostage situation in slow motion. True to his word, Capote never appeared on The Tonight Show again during Carson's remaining tenure. What made the incident particularly uncomfortable wasn't just the obvious intoxication, but the painful contrast between Capote's brilliant public persona and the incoherent figure viewers witnessed that night. If Carson maintained an unofficial ranking of challenging guests, Shelley Winters would have secured a prominent position. The 2-time Academy Award winner's Tonight Show appearances often featured drama, fueled by pre-show cocktails and complete disregard for standard interview conventions. Her pattern of arriving well lubricated became so predictable that staff developed a protocol, placing her in later guest positions, hoping she might sober slightly while waiting. This strategy rarely succeeded, as Winters typically continued drinking backstage. Her most notorious appearance came in 1974, when booked to promote her autobiography. From her unsteady entrance, viewers knew they were witnessing something unusual. Winters talked over Carson repeatedly, cut off his questions, and at one point turned to address the studio audience as if Carson weren't present. When he attempted to redirect conversation back to her book, she dismissed his question with a wave, saying nobody cared about that. The situation deteriorated when another young actor joined them. Rather than allowing Carson to interview him, Winters continuously interrupted, at one point placing her hand on the uncomfortable actor's knee while telling him he reminded her of a young Errol Flynn. When the actor attempted to answer Carson's question about his film, Winters loudly announced that his movie wasn't very good, but he was pretty to look at. Carson, normally composed, showed rare visible frustration. The breaking point came when Winters, feeling Carson wasn't sufficiently attentive, reached over and snatched his note cards, tossing them over her shoulder while announcing she was much more interesting. The cards scattered across the studio floor as the audience gasped. After finally ending the segment with an early commercial break, Carson reportedly told his producer that if she was ever booked again, he would take that night off. Winters disappeared from the guest list for nearly 3 years before returning under strict conditions, including a noon interview time for the tape-delayed show and an understanding that any similar behavior would result in a permanent ban. Dean Martin's entire persona was built around affable, slightly tipsy charm, the martini glass, the loosened tie, the gentle sway. For years, insiders insisted Martin's drinking was mostly performance, that his glass often contained apple juice rather than alcohol. This cultivated image served him well during multiple Tonight Show appearances throughout the 60s and early 70s. But something changed by the mid-70s as what had been primarily an act gradually evolved into reality, with the entertainer increasingly turning to actual alcohol to cope with personal struggles. This painful transition became undeniably apparent during a 1976 appearance. From the moment Martin walked through the curtain, something was different. Rather than his trademark controlled sway, Martin stumbled noticeably, nearly missing the guest chair. His eyes appeared unfocused, and his characteristic slur was now so pronounced that several responses were nearly incomprehensible. When Carson asked about Martin's upcoming NBC special, Martin looked genuinely confused and asked what special, apparently mixing up the Tonight Show with the Merv Griffin Show. Carson attempted to salvage things with quick wit, joking that Merv wasn't there, but he could put on a wig if it would help. The audience laughed nervously, but Martin didn't register the joke, instead staring blankly before asking what time it was, despite the interview being barely 2 minutes old. What followed was 7 excruciating minutes with Carson desperately trying to guide Martin through basic conversation while the legendary entertainer drifted further into confusion. At one point, Martin began singing unprompted, stopping midway to ask if the show was being taped or broadcast live. The most revealing moment came when Carson asked about Martin's famous golf game, and Martin briefly perked up, starting a story about playing with Sammy Davis Jr., only to suddenly stop and ask where Sammy was, despite Davis not being booked that evening. Carson mercifully brought the segment to an early close, and the camera lingered just long enough to capture genuine concern on Carson's face as a production assistant helped. Martin off stage. Backstage, according to staff accounts, Carson was uncharacteristically shaken, reportedly saying that wasn't the Dean Martin they knew. Raymond Burr commanded unparalleled respect as television's Perry Mason, the unflappable defense attorney who never lost a case. This made his disastrous 1970 Tonight Show appearance shocking. For viewers accustomed to seeing Burr as the embodiment of dignity, Burr arrived nearly 40 minutes late, forcing hasty schedule rearrangements. When he finally appeared backstage, staff immediately noticed his intoxicated state. Carson, already irritated by the scheduling disruption, was reportedly told about Burr's condition just moments before the actor was set to appear. He briefly considered canceling the segment entirely, but ultimately decided that sending away a star of Burr's magnitude would create even more problems. When Burr walked through the curtains, the contrast between the Perry Mason viewers knew, and the man before them couldn't have been starker. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, and he gripped the chair back to steady himself before sitting heavily. Instead of discussing his work, Burr launched into a rambling monologue about his orchid collection, occasionally losing his train of thought mid-sentence. For nearly 10 excruciating minutes, Burr expounded on orchid cultivation and his greenhouses in Fiji, while the audience grew increasingly uncomfortable. Carson made several attempts to redirect the conversation toward Burr's career, but the actor either didn't register these prompts or deliberately ignored them. The situation reached its nadir when Carson asked about playing Perry Mason, and Burr stared at him uncomfortably long before asking what Carson's name was again. Despite having been introduced minutes earlier, and despite Carson being the most recognized talk show host in America, Burr seemed genuinely unable to recall who was interviewing him. Carson recovered with remarkable grace, extending his hand and saying it was a pleasure to meet him, a moment that became one of his most legendary examples of composure under pressure. The incident marked Burr's last appearance and led Carson to institute new policies, requiring production assistants to personally interact with every guest shortly before their scheduled appearance to alert producers if anyone seemed impaired. These moments reveal a fascinating chapter in television history when live broadcasting meant anything could happen, and sometimes did. Carson's ability to navigate these disasters with grace, humor, and quick thinking only cemented his legendary status, reminding us that behind every polished production existed very real, very unpredictable human beings, and sometimes they arrived having had a few too many. As we've journeyed through these unforgettable moments of television chaos, one thing becomes crystal clear. Johnny Carson wasn't just a host. He was a master navigator of the unpredictable seas of live television. These incidents remind us of a bygone era when anything could happen on camera, and there was no delete button, no editing room safety net, just pure, unfiltered human moments broadcast to millions. What made Carson truly legendary wasn't that he avoided disasters, but that he handled them with such remarkable grace and wit that even the most uncomfortable situations became part of television history. If you found these stories as fascinating as we did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the golden age of television. We've got plenty more untold stories about the legends of entertainment, the moments that defined careers, and the behind-the-scenes chaos that viewers never saw. Drop a comment below and tell us which of these intoxicated appearances surprised you most, or share any other Tonight Show moments you remember. And if you enjoyed this journey into television's unscripted past, hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video. Until then, remember, sometimes the best television happens when everything goes wrong.